Hey guys, this video is brought to you by Linode, my favorite cloud hosting company. I use them for all my websites and they save me a ton of money. So if you guys are looking to host your own websites, set up your own virtual private network, a game server, really anything that runs on Linux, you can do it with Linode. And they have price points as low as $5 a month. There's a link in the description tab below. If you click on that, you can get $20 off. All right, guys, so in this video, I'm going to be talking about why I hate Tailwind CSS. And just right off the bat, I will let you know, I have not used this a ton. I've been doing CSS development for over 10 years. I consider myself to be pretty effective with it. So when tools like Sass came along, I didn't immediately adopt it. Like when Sass came along, I remember like a lot of the big pros of people using Sass. It's like, oh, you can use it to indent your code more clearly and you can drill down on specific elements. And for me, when that was like the main selling point when it first came out, I was thinking, well, no, I could do that with CSS. I don't need some higher level CSS to write my CSS. I'm sure a lot of C developers probably feel the same way about higher level stuff. Like they like to write a little lower if they understand those lower level environments. But there's obviously benefits to these higher level tools. And slowly over time, I was able to adopt Sass and I gave it a chance. I realized it saved me a lot of time. This video is about Tailwind CSS, which is a new project, seems to be gaining a lot of traction. The main reason why is we need to go into a little bit of a background about what Tailwind CSS is. It's really a fundamental difference between how we write all of our CSS, the way that we've been writing CSS literally for the last 20 plus years. So we need to look at a little bit of history here about why these tools exist. CSS is cascading style sheets. It's about how you apply style to your page to give it a look and feel, to provide a theme for colors. It's like if HTML is your skeleton, then this is your actual skin. You know, that's what CSS is. So CSS gives you full control and the browser renders any sort of CSS markup very effectively. There's actually built-in ways that the browser handles CSS files versus JavaScript files, and I'm not going to get into all that in this video. However, all that said, there's no question that CSS can be a real nightmare for developers to work with. There's a lot of senior developers I've worked with over the course of my career, and there are people that will not touch CSS. They hate the UI. They don't understand it. So if we go back a few years, to make CSS writing easier, we had projects like Less that came along and allowed you to write CSS a little bit easier. And again, Sass was actually written based off of Less and its own separate version. It kind of won out. But Less used to be used to write Bootstrap. Bootstrap is a CSS library that saves us a ton of time. And we just have to load a CSS file and we can start interacting with the classes. And we have fully responsive columns, rows. It uses Flexbox now, which is a new CSS technology. But these tools exist because they save us a lot of time. They write a bunch of styles in advance for us. And in a way, Tailwind CSS is doing the same thing. However, the big difference between it is that instead of us writing like actual CSS, we're using a functional CSS way of writing our code. And that goes back to roughly 2013. All right, so just like most technology in the programming field, there was some sort of developer meetup. Some developer, I don't remember his name, in 2013 basically gave a demonstration on functional CSS, and then, or they really called it atomic CSS. And from there, these two products got sprung up. This Tachyons was the precursor to what Tailwind CSS is today, and it's still around. And then there's also a library called Atomic CSS, which isn't really, it's Atomic CSS is a functional philosophy for writing CSS, so it's not really a project name, although they did call their project name the philosophy name. All right, so we know that CSS is hard to maintain. That's why we have Sass, we have Bootstrap, we have Materialize now, and now we have functional CSS and Tailwind CSS. So here's a demonstration of how this works. You could see that for all this styling that's occurring right here, it's using actual class names to essentially provide individual styles. Like it used a class name for centering text. So you can see as it starts getting more and more complex, the H stands for height, and then you have the W for width. So you start getting mad class names on your elements in your HTML. And as a developer who's been doing this a while, like for the last 20 some years, we were told basically do not write inline CSS. Inline CSS does not scale well. It's not maintainable. It doesn't allow you to use media queries, which means makes it responsive for your mobile apps. It's a terrible idea to do, but this is actually doing something different. It's doing class names as opposed to inline styling. So it's not exactly inline styling, but you're writing your components in a very inline styled type of way. But because these are all using individual classes, it still allows the library to drill down and to also provide media queries so that we can have responsive websites using Tailwind. So one thing that we should keep in mind is that the way that we're writing the code in Tailwind CSS is not really something new. There's been something called block element modifier, which is a methodology for writing your CSS code to make it scalable and predictable, and especially when you have lots of developers working on the same thing. But to give a demonstration of this based on their website, you have block element modifier. So again, this isn't a library. This is a methodology of how you could write your Sass code, your less code, or even if you just wanted to write plain CSS. But what you do is you identify what are my block level elements, my things that stand alone, my headers, my containers, a checkbox, and then you have your element, which is part of a block, but it has no standalone meaning. So it's tied to your block element. So that way, when you're identifying, if you have a header, that is your block, your header title is your element, and then you have your modifiers, which can change the font size of that text. It can change the color. And it does all this through classes, but you follow the same principle. You get your element, or your block, your element, your modifier. If it's a button, you can have it disabled, a checkbox disabled, whatever. Those are all your modifiers for your elements that are attached to your block. And writing your CSS this way is very similar to Tailwind CSS, except it probably uses a fraction of the amount of classes that you'll need. So in the header example, you would say like, and really this might even be a header component, and you wouldn't even have to drill down on that, and you could just say class dot title, or obviously not dot in here, but class title space disabled or something like that, and you're dealing with a few classes versus having to deal with a ton with Tailwind CSS. All right, so Tailwind CSS is not all bad. A lot of people really like it. When I go to the website and I look at Built with Tailwind, I look at some examples here and I look at different sites and they look good. So clearly some professional designers are writing some of these sites. This looks like a very well-designed site. I can't blame it or can't knock it for anything. Obviously, we've had this capability with Bootstrap. This doesn't look anything different from any sort of Bootstrap theme that's out there, but it's using Tailwind CSS. But let's look at the actual source here, what we're looking at. And when we look here, clearly this person has a lot of familiarity with Tailwind. But what I hate about this is, let me make this a little bigger, is the sheer amount of classes that you have to put on all of your elements. So people that will say, oh, Tailwind shrunk my CSS or this or that. Well, clearly it ballooned up your HTML because now you have all these classes on your elements that didn't used to be there when we had styles all kind of grouped into one. This isn't the only way that you can specify styles on individual elements or components. Like I said, with the block element modifier, that's been in existence. You could also just simply write decent CSS code that's drilling down. But I will admit, large CSS projects are very difficult to maintain. This is a completely new way of doing things. It's going to take me a bit for me to accept something like this. In fact, I think we're kind of solving a problem that doesn't need to be solved with this. But if this ends up being the new standard, I can get on board with it. I'll be able to handle it. It's not like it's that much difficult to learn. It's just, I really find it odd that it's just another example of programming where we're just kind of spinning around in circles and we're like, oh, we've been doing it this way for so long, blah, blah, blah. Let's do it this way and let's accomplish the exact, let's get to the same exact endpoint, but completely redo the way that we're doing it. So I don't know. A lot of people will be like, well, Chris, you're just being negative and technology moves forward. This isn't an example of technology moving forward to me. This is an example of made up created hoops that we're probably all going to have to jump through if this thing keeps taking off. But that said, I don't like all the classes in the HTML. I think CSS is there for a reason. I think that for 20 some years we've been saying, okay, let's put our CSS in external style sheets. And I think that's why we have tools that allow us to write those external style sheets like Sass. We have component libraries that allow us to reuse a lot of component-based code already with like things like Bootstrap. And I like the fact that raw CSS, you're not battling the framework. You're simply working with the browser.